This next chapter is a long one, How to Tell a True War Story. And teachers often will ask you to remember some of the truths about a war story. And I've circled these. I think they're important just to know overall as we read the rest of this book, but also it's just like ironic. All of these statements are ironic. And I think it also goes to the question of how much of this story is true. Remember, this is a work of fiction, and yet the way it's written, with Tim O'Brien being the narrator and being a character in the book, it does seem like it's a memoir. And I think I cannot stress enough times, it is not a memoir. And because it reads like one, readers sometimes actually get a little mad about the fact that it isn't all true. So this kind of addresses that. I guess we could sort of call it a controversy. There have been articles written about this where people sort of complain about this quality of this story, this sense of truth when maybe it's not. And I'm actually going to link an article in the discussion that is from the University of Texas, where a lot of Tim O'Brien's writing is archived. And there are some places there where where Tim O'Brien personally in his writing addresses this sort of tension between the truth and fiction, and also just some scholars' views of it. So I think that might help. Your teachers hopefully are also going to be providing you some outside reading having to do with this. So this is a story here about Rat Kiley, whose first name actually is Bob. Remember, he's the medic. And it talks about how a friend of his got killed. His friend's name was Curt Lemon. And we're going to find out sort of throughout this chapter the many versions of what happened. So what they were doing is they were having fun, just sort of like goofing around here, tossing hand grenades back and forth, but they were like smoke grenades, so they weren't the kind of hand grenade that would go off as an explosion. They would just make smoke. And they're kind of, he talks about how he loved his friend, and when he died, obviously how grief-stricken he is. So this first part of the story is how after Curt Lemon dies, he takes a lot of time to write a letter to Curt Lemon's sister, talking about what a great guy he was, how they had so much fun, and telling stories about the kind of things that they would do on the front or as they were, moving from one place to another. He pours his heart out. He says he loved the guy. The guy was his best friend in the world. They were like soulmates, he says, like twins or something. They had a whole lot in common. He tells the guy's sister he'll look her up when the war is over. And what happens is after 2 months, she never writes back. And he uses like a really, terrible word to describe her. And it makes him so angry that he has poured his heart out to her, trying to empathize with her grief, and she doesn't have the decency to reply to his letter. So this is sort of how this begins. It goes on then to say that a true war story is never moral. If you feel that some small bit of rectitude has been salvaged from the larger waste, then you have been made the victim of a very old and terrible lie. There is no rectitude in war. There is no virtue in war. War is absolutely obscene and evil. Listen to Rat Kiley. Coos, he says, a terrible word. He does not say bitch. He does not say woman or girl. He says a terrible word to describe her. He spits and stares. He's 19 years old. It's too much for him. You can tell a true war story because it will embarrass you. Curt Lemon is the guy. And here's what happened. They were in the deep jungle. Right away, Lemon and Rat Kiley start goofing around. They didn't understand about the spookiness of the deep jungle. They were kids. They just didn't know. They pretended they were on a nature hike. Not even the war, like they're just out in the jungle, like it's a cool place, right? The game involved smoke grenades, which were harmless unless you did stupid things. And what they did was pull out the pin and stand a few feet apart and play catch under the shade of those huge trees. Whoever chickened out was a yellow mother, and if nobody chickened out, the grenade would make a light popping sound and they'd be covered in smoke. It's all exactly true. Okay, this makes me wonder, is it? So Curt Lemon and Rat Kiley were playing catch. Mitchel Sanders sat flipping his yo-yo. Norman Boker and Kiowa and Dave Jensen were dozing. And all around were those ragged green mountains. Except for the laughter, things were quiet. At one point, Mitchel Sanders turned and looked at me, not quite nodding, as if to warn me about something. And then after a while, he rolled up his yo-yo and moved away. It's hard to tell you what happened next. They were just goofing. There was a noise, I suppose, which must have been the detonator, so I glanced behind me and watched Lemon step from the shade into the bright sunlight. His face was suddenly brown and shining. A handsome kid, really. Sharp gray eyes, lean, narrow-waisted, and when he died, it was almost beautiful, the way the sunlight came around him and lifted him up and sucked him high into a tree. If any war story, but especially a true one, is difficult to separate what happened from what seemed to happen, then you know it's true. What seemed to happen becomes its own happening and has to be told that way. Okay, so that's a deviation from the truth. What seems to happen may not be what actually happened. When things are happening, when a guy dies like Curt Lemon, you look away and then you look back and then you look away. And so pictures get jumbled. You miss a lot. There's a surreal seemingness, which is true in life. Like, we don't catch everything in our lives. Think about your own memories. I'm sure there are many where like a sibling will say, no, that's not what happened. You know, it's remembered differently. In many cases, a true war story cannot be believed, which is ironic because, you know, we're just discovering here that true war stories include jumbling, surrealness. Crazy stuff is true and normal stuff isn't. In other cases, you can't even tell a true war story. Sometimes it's beyond telling, like it's too much to say. God's truth, Mitchel Sanders said, a 6-man patrol goes up in the mountains on a basic listening post operation. So this is a story that Mitchel Sanders tells Tim O'Brien one night. They've got a radio along, so if they hear anything, they're supposed to call in artillery or gunships or whatever. So they're up there in the jungle, and it's absolutely quiet, and they just listen. So this is a different story from the one I just told you about Curt Lemon dying in a tree. Sanders glances at me to make sure I have the scenario. He's playing with his yo-yo. We're talking regulations by the book. These 6 guys, they don't say a boo for a solid week. So they're up there listening just to see if there's anybody up there in those mountains. Right, I said. Invisible. So what happens is these guys get themselves deep in the bush, all camouflaged up. And that's all they do is lay there and listen for 7 days. And it's spooky. This is the mountains. You don't know spooky till you've been up there. So after a couple days, the guys start hearing this real soft, kind of whacked out music. Weird echoes and stuff. Like a radio or something. But it's not a radio. It's this strange gook music that comes right out of the rocks. Okay, so right away, I'm like, okay, what? Are they hallucinating? Are they hearing things because it's too quiet? These are all logical explanations. No way it can't be real. But there it is. Like the mountains are tuned in to fucking radio or Hanai, you know. Naturally, they get nervous. One guy sticks juicy fruit in his ears. And in case you don't know, juicy fruit is a gum. Chewing gum. I mean, they still make it, but I don't know how many people chew it. They can't get on the horn and call back to the base and say, hey, listen, we need some firepower to blow away this music. So they realize like what's going on. They can't like say it's a threat. And it's interesting that they all seem to hear it. The next part, Sanders says, you won't believe. And I'm thinking, okay, is that because it's not true? You won't. And you know why? He says, because it happened, which is the opposite of what I was thinking. Sanders made a sound in his throat like a sigh, as if to say he didn't care if I believed him or not, but he did care. He wanted me to feel the truth. Okay, so I think this could be a little red line here, meaning like a very important line. I'm assuming Tim O'Brien wants us to feel the truth, to believe by the raw force of feeling. Those 6 guys, they're pretty fried by now. And one night they start hearing voices like a cocktail party. And they start to hear chamber music and then an opera and a barbershop quartet and funky chanting and Buddha music. The whole time, there's still that cocktail party sound going on someplace. The rock, it's talking, and the fog too, and the grass and the goddamn mongooses. Everything talks. The trees talk, the monkeys, the whole country. Nam, it truly talks. So this is true. I mean, when you go someplace that's silent, it's not actually silent. There are always noises. So, it's worth discussing, like, what do you think actually could have happened in this situation? Were they just like hyper-focused on the sounds they did hear and they became loud in their head? I mean, there's a lot of ways to explain this logically. But I think it's also worth saying that maybe we shouldn't try. Maybe we should just accept this for the emotional truth. There's another idea. The guys can't cope and they lose it. And what they end up doing is saying that they need firepower, that something's happening up there because they want to get out of there and they want to go back. And so what happens is they do send in, helicopters and they bomb the whole area and they set it on fire and all sorts of stuff. And they make those mountains burn. Around dawn, things finally get quiet, like you never heard quiet before. So they've killed a lot of wildlife, I'm sure. One of those real thick, misty days, clouds and fog. They're off in this special zone, and the mountains are absolutely dead, flat, silent. But they still hear it. So they get out of there. They pack up their stuff, and they start humping. They head down in the mountain to the base camp. When they get there, they don't say anything, not a word. Later on, this fat bird colonel comes over and asks what happened out there. Why did they need all the ordinances? Why did they have to, send all this firepower and burn the mountains? But they don't say anything. They just look at him for a while, sort of funny-like, sort of amazed, and the whole war is right there in that stare. It says everything you can't ever say. It says, man, you got wax in your ears. It says, poor bastard, you'll never know. Wrong frequency. You don't even want to hear it. Then they salute the fucker and walk away because certain stories you don't ever tell. So this is interesting too. And I think this is, I'm sure, true. Like some things you just cannot tell. I'm sure even in our pedestrian lives, there are things that we experience in just ordinary civilian life, not in a war, where it's like, you can't tell it adequately, so you just don't. This is an extreme of that. Of course, there are so many things in war that you can't really tell. You can tell a true war story because it never seems to end. That's a much broader truth, evidenced by this book, because clearly he's telling these stories again and again for himself, Tim O'Brien is. Even now at this instant, I remember that yo-yo. In a way, I suppose you had to be there, you had to hear it, but I could tell how desperately Sanders wanted me to believe him, his frustration at not quite getting the details right, not quite pinning down the final and definitive truth. Like it's hard to tell the truth. It's hard to wrap your head around it. Late in the night, Mitchel Sanders touched my shoulder and says, just came to me, he said, the moral, nobody listens. Nobody hears nothing. Okay, so remember, Tim O'Brien earlier in this chapter said a true war story doesn't have a moral. So I'm thinking, okay, is this not true? Like that fat-ass colonel, the politicians, all the civilian types, your girlfriend, my girlfriend, everybody's sweet little virgin girlfriend. What they need is to go out there in the vapors and the trees, and you got to listen to your enemy. Like, no one gets it. Then again in the morning, Sanders came up to me and he says, I got a confession. Last night, I had to make up a few things. Well, I think we probably could have guessed that, right? I know that. The Glee Club, there wasn't a Glee Club, right? No opera. Forget it, I understand. But it's still true. So this is another important point. And I think you have to think about, what does this mean? Like, if a story is made up, how is it still true? Those 6 guys, they heard wicked sound. They heard sound that you wouldn't believe, and it scared them. I think we can take that away too. On the next page, if I don't go too far, Tim O'Brien tries to humor him. Okay, what's the moral? No, go ahead. And after a while, Mitchel Sanders says, that quiet, just listen. There's your moral. In a true story, if there's a moral, it's like the thread that makes the cloth. You can't tease it out, which is what's happening here. He's having a hard time putting it in words. There's nothing much to say about a true war story except maybe, oh. Also, true war stories do not generalize. Here's one I forgot to circle for you. They do not indulge in abstraction or analysis. Like war is hell, that's not a true war story, because I can't believe it with my stomach. A true war story, if truly told, makes the stomach believe. This one does it for me, and I've told it before many times. This is what actually happened. And I'm like, really? Right, sure it is. We crossed that river and marched west into the mountains. On the 3rd day, Curt Lemon stepped on a booby-trapped 105 round. He was playing catch with Rat Kiley, laughing, and then he was dead. The trees were thick. It took nearly an hour to cut an LZ for the dust off, so to even be able to make room for the helicopter to come in and get him. Later that night, high in the mountains, we came across a baby Viet Cong water buffalo. What it was doing there, I don't know. No farms or paddies, but we chased it down and got a rope and led it along to a deserted village where we set up for the night. After supper, Rat Kiley went over and stroked its nose. He opened up a can of sea rations, pork and beans, but the baby buffalo wasn't interested. Rat shrugged. Then he stepped back and shot it through the right front knee. Now, this is really hard to read. It goes on and on about all the ways that Rat Kiley tortured and eventually killed the baby buffalo. Just every little piece of its body that he targeted. Afterwards, it lay very still. It's dying, clearly, and Rat Kiley was crying. He tried to say something, but then cradled his rifle and went off by himself. So what's happening here is, because he's so grief-stricken by the loss of Curt Lemon, he's taking out his pain on this creature, which is so sad. The rest of us stood in a ragged circle around the baby buffalo, and no one spoke. We had witnessed something essential, something brand new and profound, a piece of the world so startling there was not yet a name for it. I mean, I can't even, in what I just explained, do adequate justice to what's going on in that scene. Somebody kicked it. Amazing, Dave Jensen said. My whole life, I never seen anything like it. Kiowa and Mitchel Sanders picked up the baby buffalo. They hauled it across the open square, hoisted it up, and dumped it into the village well. Afterwards, we sat waiting for Rat to get himself together. Amazing, Dave Jensen kept saying. A new wrinkle. I never seen it before. Mitchel Sanders says, well, that's Nam, Garden of Evil. How do you generalize? War is hell, but that's not the half of it, because war is also mystery and terror and adventure and courage and discovery and holiness and pity and despair and longing and love. It's nasty, it's fun, it's thrilling. Drudgery, it makes you a man, it makes you dead. The truths are contradictory. It can be argued, for instance, that war is grotesque, but it's also beauty. So we're going to see a lot of this whole paragraph here is like the good things and the bad things, like the beautiful things that you see. It's astonishing. It fills the eye. It commands you. You hate it, but your eyes do not. Like a killer forest fire, like cancer under a microscope, like we're drawn to pay attention. To generalize about war is like generalizing about peace. Almost everything is true. Almost nothing is true. At its core, perhaps, war is just another name for death, and yet any soldier will tell you, if he tells you the truth, that proximity to death brings with it a corresponding proximity to life. After a firefight, there is always that immense pleasure of aliveness. The trees are alive, the grass, soil, everything, which, of course, that is also true. Think about all the things that we are saying are true. Though it's odd, you're never more alive than when you're almost dead. You recognize what's valuable. Freshly, as if for the first time, you love what's best in yourself and in the world, all that might be lost. At the hour of dusk, you sit at your foxhole and look out on a wide river turning pinkish red, at the mountains. You find yourself studying the fine colors of the river. For now, the world could be and always should be like in a beautiful place. You know, you love it. Mitchel Sanders was right. For the common soldier, at least, war has the feel, the spiritual texture of a great ghostly fog, thick and permanent. Now, part of this is because of Vietnam. Many, many parts in Asia have this quality because of jungles and mountains and the weather. It can be very gray and misty. I don't know necessarily if someone who would have fought, in the Gulf War would have said such a thing. When you're fighting in the desert, it's an entirely different feeling. But in this war, it was very much that way. Old rules are no longer binding. The old truth's no longer true. Right spills over into wrong. Order blends into chaos. Love into hate. Ugliness into beauty. Law into anarchy. Civility into savagery. The vapors suck you in. You can't tell where you are. You lose your sense of the definite. In a true war story, nothing is ever absolutely true. I think that's very important too. Often in a true war story, there is not even a point, or else the point doesn't hit you until 20 years later, which is what's happening, I'm sure, to Tim O'Brien. This one wakes me up. In the mountains that day, I watched Lemon turn sideways. He laughed and said something to Rat Kiley. Then he took a peculiar half step, moving from shade into bright sunlight, and the booby-trapped 105 round blew him into a tree. The parts were just hanging there, so Dave Jensen and I were ordered to shinny up and peel him off. Oh my God. I remember my white bone of an arm. I remember the white bone of an arm. I remember pieces of skin and something wet and yellow that must have been intestines. Dave Jensen is singing Lemon Tree as we threw down the parts. You can tell a true war story by the questions you ask. Is it true? As if the answer matters. For example, we've all heard this one. 4 guys go down a trail, a grenade sails out, 1 guy jumps on it and takes the blast and saves his 3 buddies. Is it true? The answer matters. You'd feel cheated if it never happened. Okay, I put a star here. This is why some readers in the past have taken issue with this book, because it's fiction, and many of these things did not happen actually, and they feel cheated. Without the grounding reality, it's just a trite little bit of puffery, pure Hollywood, untrue in all the ways that such stories are untrue. And yet, even if it did happen, and maybe it did, anything's possible, even then you know it can't be true, because a true war story does not depend on that kind of truth. Okay, so this is worth discussing. I'm not going to give you the answers to these questions. They're very abstract, and they could be answered in many different ways. So here we have it again. For example, 4 guys go down a trail, a grenade sails out, 1 guy jumps on it and takes the blast, but it's a killer grenade and everybody dies anyway. There's another version. That's a true story that never happened. So he's kind of like playing with us here as a reader. 20 years later, I can still see the sunlight on Lemon's face. I can see him turning, looking back at Rat Kiley, and then he laughed and took that curious half step from shade into sunlight, his face suddenly brown and shining, And when his foot touched down in that instant, he must have thought it was the sunlight that was killing him. It was not the sunlight. It was a rigged 105 round. But if I could ever get the story right, how the sun seemed to gather around him and pick him up and lift him high into a tree, if I could somehow recreate the fatal whiteness of that light, the quick glare, the obvious cause and effect, then you would believe the last thing Curt Lemon believed, which for him must have been the final truth, which is something to discuss. Now and then when I tell this story, someone will come up to me afterwards and say she liked it. It's always a woman. Usually it's an older woman of kindly temperament and humane politics. She'll explain that as a rule she hates war stories and she can't understand why people want to wallow in all that blood and gore, which is such an, honest to God, ignorant thing to say. But this one she liked, The Poor Baby Buffalo. This is the one I could hardly read. It made her sad. Sometimes even there are little tears. What I should do, she'll say, is put it all behind me. Find new stories to tell. I won't say it, but I'll think it. I'll picture Rat Kiley's face and his grief, and I'll think, you dumb coos. Like, how ignorant, how unempathetic, like how not to know the importance of these stories for someone who served in a war, because she wasn't listening. It wasn't a war story. It was a love story. So realizing that Rat Kiley did those things because he had lost such a close friend whom he loved. All you can do is tell it one more time patiently, adding and subtracting, making up a few things to get to the real truth. No Mitchel Sanders, you tell her, no Lemon, no Rat Kiley, no Trail Junction, no baby buffalo, no vines or moss or white blossoms. Beginning to end, you tell her it's all made up. Every goddamn detail. The mountains, the river, and especially that poor, dumb baby buffalo. None of it happened. None of it. And even if it did happen, it didn't happen in the mountains. It happened in this little village on the Batangan Peninsula. And it was raining like crazy. And one night, a guy named Stink Harris woke up screaming with a leech on his tongue. You can tell a true war story if you just keep on telling it. So what I'm taking from this, it's quite possible none of this is true at all, but it's still truth about war. It's truth about memory and experience. It's giving us the emotional truth. And in the end, of course, a true war story is never about war. It's about sunlight, the special way that dawn spreads out on a river when you know you must cross it, and march in the mountains to do things you are afraid to do. It's about love and memory. It's about sorrow. It's about sisters who never write back and people who never listen. So take a look at the article I'll put in the discussion section of the video post. And I hope that you discuss a lot of these ideas in your class.